Welcome to the number 30 edition of the Outdated Wrestling Hour. We're glad you're back, and we have a special guest, the returning Brian R. Solomon, the writer, who just wrote a great book called Superheroes. It's all about the comic book classic heroes of the past. You know, about 20 years ago, I got into a giant argument with my sweet wife, Lilibred. Yes, I did. We were laying on the beach, and we started to talk about our favorite comics characters. And I said, I love Aquaman. And she said, Aquaman, he stinks. I said, why? She says, once he gets on dry land, what does he do? He just punches. He has no powers out of the water. But I said, he's a noble guy. He knew how to talk to the... She said, I don't care. He's a bum. That ruined that trip to Atlantic City, I'll tell you. Well, you know, good soup there. You know, chowder. It's the Outdated Wrestling Hour. Hey, everybody. My name is Bob Smith. It is great to be back. And welcome to the latest edition of the Outdated Wrestling Hour, number 30, if you're keeping score at home, which you're not. But this is our 30th episode, and our special guest is going to be the great writer, Brian R. Solomon. We're going to get right to the festivities here because we got a lot to talk about between wrestling and Brian's new book called Superheroes! We're going to have a lot of fun. So I will come back at the end of the interview and we'll talk about all the housekeeping and other stuff that's going on and other exciting happenings. But in the meantime, I want to get right to it because this is one of my favorite people in the wrestling business right now. Ladies and gentlemen, writer extraordinaire, Brian R. Solomon. Well, we are really happy to welcome back one of the busiest writers around, and we're not just talking wrestling. Sure, he's still getting plaudits for his multi-award-winning biography, Blood and Fire, the unbelievable real-life story of wrestling's original Sheik, and rightfully so. However, at present, our guest is working on a new biography about the life and times of the legendary Gorilla Monsoon. But he also has a new book out, this time all about the fictional heroes that most of us grew up loving, superheroes. And that's the name of the latest release book on the Applause imprint called Superheroes! The history of a pop culture phenomenon from Ant-Man to Zorro. And that's not all. This guy is also busy as a successful podcaster, hosting his own show called Shut Up and Wrestle on the Arcadian Vanguard Network. He's also co-host of the PWI podcast, and he writes the Daily Wrestling News podcast on the same network. And he continues to write for Pro Wrestling Illustrated, where I worked about 65 years ago. I don't know how he does it all, but I'm very glad he does. And he's now established himself as an unparalleled wrestling expert and a first-rate journalist. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming back the impossibly prolific and absolutely terrific Brian R. Solomon.
Wow, Bob, thank you so much. That's great.
No, listen, you are the only guest that I was intimidated to contact at first.
But we've already talked.
I know we've talked before, but you know what? You're so busy.
Yes, that's
but
just
you know
true.
what I like. You know what I like about you. You always take time on Facebook to show off your family and your vacation pictures and other fun things that you guys do. So in addition to all that work I listed, you're still out there having a good time, which is something I have never been able to balance. You know?
I try. You know, it's like I try to have some type of a work-life balance. It's important to me. You know, I mean, the biggest demand on my time is the wrestling news because that's a script that I write the majority of on a daily basis, 24/7, 365. So, you know, on occasions like that where I do go away, I've got to let the guys know and, you know, make sure that, you know, usually it'll be, well, not usually, anytime it'll be Mike Sempervive that covers for me. And, you know, he's the producer and he'll step in. And I don't like to do it too often because he's already working so hard as the producer and he's recording the thing every morning. I don't want to also give him a script to write, you know. So, you know, I'm not, when I do have a reason, it's a good one when I can't do it. Like, you know, last weekend when I went away, it was 15 minutes from my house, but we went to this coastal hotel in Stratford, Connecticut, and stayed there for a couple of days. My wife and me and the kids.
This must be a really nice time for you, though, because I know, but way back in the dark ages when I won an award for doing an article about Mike Tyson, it hit me out of the blue. I didn't expect it. It kind of, bing. It's like, wow, I really did something with value here. Your Sheik book is now a multi-award winner in various ways, and I know you've been touring around and getting awards from. Tell me about the Michigan thing. If you
Sure.
can explain that to our listeners about what happened in Michigan.
Well, it was selected. The book was selected, and I have Dave Brzezinski to thank for this. He was the Sheik's last manager. He was somebody who was really instrumental in helping make the book a really good book because of all the information he provided to me and the contacts. And he helped to kind of put my book on the radar of the Library of Michigan. And of course, with the Sheik being a Michigan native, it was a relevant book. And the Library of Michigan selected it as one of their notable books of the year. And it's about 20, 30 books each year that get picked for that honor. And mine was one. And it was really cool because it's like you get to hold a physical award in your hands, and I took I didn't take my wife. I would have loved to. She couldn't get out of work, but I took my daughter, which was fabulous. I took my daughter with me to sort of show her like, hey, daddy's not crazy. Like these things that I do are actually pretty nifty and people like them sort of. And so it's kind of cool. I have it on my mantle. I'm looking at it right now in my house. And, because the Wrestling Observer Award is wonderful too and incredible because it's like the highest honor that a wrestling book can attain. I hope maybe that one day that Dave creates physical awards because I'm a very physical kind of guy. I would love to have another one to put on the mantle, but I'm still thrilled beyond words that got voted because that's a voting thing with the readers.
Right.
And I really thought I don't know, because there's a lot of young fans that read the Observer. It skews young, actually. It has there's a lot of people, there's a lot of AEW fans that read it. Like there was the year that the Young Bucks book beat the Andre the Giant biography, which I'll be very diplomatic about, as have Pat LaPrade and Bertrand Hébert, the authors of that book, been very diplomatic. But I was sort of thinking well, I guess I'm really happy that nobody in AEW wrote a book last year.
Well, even if it's, let's say, a quasi-popularity contest, what's wrong with that too?
Sure.
It just showed people found something interesting about it. I talk to people about it, and it's like you'd be surprised at the amount of current fans who have never heard of the original Sheik.
Oh, I'm not surprised. That's one of the reasons I wrote it. I was discovering that. Yeah.
To you and me, he was like the standard of a ring villain, that everybody would try to achieve that level of success. But you tell somebody 30, 40 years old, they go, oh yeah, Iron Sheik. They always mix up the two. So if nothing else, you were able to clarify that for a lot of people. This was the original Sheik.
I was, and I changed the Google algorithm. If you do a Google search now on the words wrestling Sheik, Ed Farhat is the first thing that comes up, and then Khosrow Vaziri. It used to be in reverse. It used to have to scroll quite a bit to get to the Ed Farhat. Before I wrote this book, I'm not saying it's because of the book. I'm just saying it changed over the last 3 years for whatever reason.
Yeah. It's still right next to my bed. It's still on my bed table. I refer to it all the time. I really, like I said, it's the book I've always wanted to read. And even as a full grown old fart, it answered questions that I've had my whole life about that guy. It's like there was so many things I wanted to know. And, I ran into him. I actually spoke with him once, but as total fluke. I think I explained that on the previous podcast. But it's like he was such an enigma who lived his gimmick, I think, harder than anybody who's ever lived or ever worked in the business. He would not drop it for a second.
No question. He was the champion of that. No question about it. And you would say, the funny thing is, back in the day, some you'd say oh, Abdullah the Butcher, for sure. It was on that level too. Mm-hmm. Now, Abdullah the Butcher has lived so long into the post-kayfabe era, as we've seen on Dark Side of the Ring and stuff like that, that now that's out the window. I mean, in his time, yes. the Sheik did not really make it to the era of the shoot interviews and things like that and documentaries. And who knows if he would have broken or not, but the fact remains that he never did. So,
well, the closest thing was detailed in your book. The previous book about the McKigney,
Drawing Heat.
Drawing Heat. There were some quotes there that were so inside that I couldn't believe it.
It's the only time. That is the only time on the record that there was the Sheik speaking, in as himself on the record publicly. I mean, it's not an audio recording you can hear, but it's transcribed. And I imagine that the author of the book must have had tapes. It's amazing and tantalizing to wonder what happened to those. But if he did, but that is the only place that you will find, quote, believe me, because I tried, that you will find real, actual quotes from Ed Farhat, the person, about his life and his career.
What an absolutely fascinating man. It's just fascinating. Like I said, he set the standard for not only being a heel, but for living the wrestling life as it was during the serious kayfabe era. You know what I'm saying? It's like, we're not breaking kayfabe for 2 seconds here. This is the real stuff. What people are watching is real, and I want them to believe it. And I am the Sheik. It's just, and he took it to, well, they say he worked for ECW later, but he was the first extreme guy. He really was.
Well, you have that paranoia the guys like that did, that their whole meal ticket would evaporate. It was a different time. There was a generous portion of that audience that believed in the reality of what they were seeing. If they didn't, they wouldn't be trying to kill these guys, which they were. You're not going to jump the ring and try to stab somebody if you think they're just pretending.
Right.
So there obviously were some people that thought it was real. And, there's a famous story about when Gilligan's Island was on the air, that they would get letters. The network would get letters saying that somebody's got to get to that island and save those people, get them off. Swear to God. So they're out there. Those people are out there. And especially they were back then. That's the same era, incidentally, as the Sheik's heyday. So, he was worried that if it got out, that his business would tank.
I'm sure that's true. Hey, listen, I was at a World Class card in 1990 and saw a Hispanic woman run out of the stands, heading toward the ring during an Abdullah versus Kevin Von Erich match. And it's like, lady, what are you thinking?
Right.
And I remember Gary Hart took her aside and said, what are you thinking? What is wrong with you? He was talking to her as if he's talking to somebody he knew. He actually pulled her aside. Why are you rushing the ring? Are you crazy? It was fascinating. Not only because of what she was doing, but because of the way Hart handled it. It was incredible. Yeah. It was amazing.
Yeah.
He diffused the situation. She didn't get arrested.
And he did it in a way without actually breaking kayfabe at all, but even though he was speaking to her.
Yeah, he was doing this near me, so it was easy. Do you know what this man is capable of? Do you know how dangerous it is to get near that ring? He told her the whole thing, and she just sheepishly kind of withered and went back to her seat. It was fascinating. Gary Hart's another one who's a little underrated. I think he's a brilliant guy, just absolutely brilliant. Definitely. But so are you, because now you have veered off into something that I was really into as a child: comic books and superheroes. I collected them like crazy. I always tell people, if I hadn't been forced to relinquish my collection, I could have put 2 kids through college with what they'd be worth now. I'm just sick. I'll always be. It's not really a tragedy, but it's a major disappointment in my kid life, because my parents rode me like a government mule, going, "Stop reading them funny books."
My grandfather had a copy of Action Comics #1 when he was a kid.
Oh gosh,
he was 13 when it came out, and he had it, and his mother threw it away.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. But you want to know something, Bob? That's why they're so valuable today, because everybody's mother threw them away.
Right.
That's what happened back then in the 30s and 40s. Nobody thought anything of it. So the people that have them, that's why they're so valuable. And that's why nothing is worth anything now, because everybody's so smart. They kept everything. I came along as a collector and a reader of comics in the era when collecting was in style. Like, I started in the mid 80s and going into the 90s, where, the collector's market was well known. You had conventions everywhere. You had all the gimmick covers, the foil, the variants, so everybody was wise to it. And because of that, I have very few comics that are extremely valuable in my own personal collection. The ones I've been able to track down, like a few Silver Age ones over the years and things that I enjoy, I'm willing to shell out for. But the ones I actually bought myself on a newsstand, there's really, I mean, because they're all from like the mid 80s and beyond. So that's like I said, when the collectability started to come down because everybody was collecting them.
Right. Oh gosh, I had so much Silver Age stuff, dude. I just
That's my favorite era.
oh, me too. Oh gosh, I still buy the reprint books.
Me
They
too.
do the reprint books of Marvel Masterworks and stuff like that. I'm hooked on those because they bring back such great memories of being 10, 11 years old and sitting in my room reading about the travails of Ben Grimm and how he hated being the Thing, and things like that. It's just those comic books. I'll tell you what, I wouldn't be the writer I turned into without comic books.
Yeah, I agree. It's a lot. You get a lot of vocabulary from them, pacing, how to pace a story, things like that. Because a lot of kids, that's what they read. I mean, that's not all I read as a kid, but I read tons of comic books, and absolutely helped me to develop as a writer, to learn how to do it, and also honestly to learn what not to do, because we don't want to be cliched or hackneyed and things. There's certain things to avoid, and comics were full of those things to avoid.
Recently I had John McCall, who has a podcast called Wrestling Talk with Mayor McCall. And we were talking about, I said, what attracted you to wrestling when you were a kid? And he said, well, the stars of Memphis wrestling were our superheroes had come to life. That's the way he put it. So since this is a wrestling podcast, and during one of our last two conversations, I think you brought up a fact that there were a lot of parallels between superheroes and professional wrestling. Could you expand on that a little bit and tell me what you mean by that?
Sure. I mean, in a lot of ways, wrestling is real life comic book stuff, real life heroes and villains. People have talked about, for example, the appeal of lucha libre. It's literally real life superheroes and villains. I mean, they dress like them. They have alter egos. When they were making all the movies about them, they were treated like superheroes in the movies. So it's not something that's lost on people. I mean, the WWF territory was always known for these larger than life characters. I've talked to people who have said growing up, in the 60s, 70s, into the 80s, that they were like, it was like seeing a real life comic book, and that's why sometimes, people love the larger than life aspects of pro wrestling, which I sometimes worry that we're losing, because that's one of the appeals of pro wrestling, is that it's this pure kind of, symbolic combat in the same way that a comic book can be. There used to be a rule. I don't know if it still is the case, but there was an unwritten or maybe written, I don't know, rule in comic books that every issue had to have at least one fight in it somewhere. There had to be a fight. Now, I think that started going out the window when they started writing more cerebral comics, but definitely in the Stan Lee era, that was a rule. There had to be some type of a fight that broke out in every issue, because people liked seeing the good guys versus bad guys. So the appeal of comics and the appeal of wrestling, it's easy to see why they overlap so much, why there's a lot of people that enjoy both of them. I always say wrestling and comics are like peanut butter and jelly.
Yeah. And, I was just thumbing through the book just a few minutes ago and caught the posters for the El Santo movies,
Yeah.
That was a perfect juxtaposition between wrestling. He was a wrestler who also happened to be a superhero in the movies.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's what I mean. It was literally turning wrestlers into superheroes. And so when I had a chapter in the book on international superheroes, because the superhero genre of fiction was invented in the United States, North America, but it spread all over the world. And so when I was giving examples from other countries, I included the luchador tradition in Mexico, because it's definitely an example of, of a subgenre of superhero fiction.
You cram so much into 322 pages. I mean, and the format of the book is something I want to talk about, and I don't want to give it away for people who are going to go out and buy the book, but this is not, you would think from the title, from Ant-Man to Zorro, it's going to be A, Ant-Man, B, Batman, C, the Canary, whatever. It's not like that at all. It's not just a list. It's the way you have moved from genre to genre, TV to film, heroes to villains, all in the most unique way. I mean, this reads more like, well, I've never read an applause book like this. I'll tell you that, because I'm a fan of the applause books. This is totally unlike anyone I've ever seen before.
Well, thank you. This is the applause book. There used to be the FAQ series that was done through Hal Leonard, and that's how I did the pro wrestling FAQ and the Godzilla FAQ. And Hal Leonard sold off the imprint to a different company called Roman and Littlefield, and they took over the applause stuff. And what they wanted to do was rebrand it. So it's like essentially it's an FAQ book, but they're giving each book it's more of its own individual personality now rather than being part of a series. But I approached it in a lot of the same way as I did those other two, which is exactly what you said, to try and cram as much into it as I could. And it's actually the same structure as the wrestling one, where the first 6, 7, 8 chapters are straight up history, like from the beginning of civilization up to, the latest Marvel and DC movies in terms of like the history of superheroes. And then it's like chapters dealing with every aspect of it that you can think of. And you can read each chapter individually without having to read anything else in the book if you want. And that's how I did the other two, Godzilla and Pro Wrestling FAQ.
It's since you had written for Applause before, who came up with the concept for this book? Did you go to them or did they come to you? And did you take the idea to the publishers, or did someone say, hey, you'd be perfect for this?
Well, I did the same thing that I did with Godzilla, which is that after I did the last book for them, I eventually sent them a list and said, here's some other topics that I could write a similar book about that you haven't done yet. And I had other things on there. I had like a wide variety of things. Like I had Sinatra FAQ, or not FAQ, but whatever, zombie movies. Italian opera, classic Hollywood animation, all these weird, bizarre things that I'm interested in. They picked superheroes. Actually, I pushed hard for superheroes because I know it's so popular today with the movies and stuff. It's like evergreen. You can get it out there and it's always going to be relevant with all these movies constantly coming out and now TV series and things. So, that they liked the idea. The interesting thing is I pitched it before I pitched the Sheik book to a different company, ECW Press, but I never heard anything back initially from Roman and Littlefield. I gave them a couple of months. I was like, I guess they don't want it. Then I pitched the Sheik, and then ECW Press said yes to the Sheik, and then Roman and Littlefield got back to me and said yes to superheroes. So I had to, sort of say, okay, guys, I got to pace this. And I wound up working on superheroes, starting the manuscript immediately after I finished the manuscript for Sheik, even though there was still post-production for Sheik that had to be done, photography, layout. I was doing that while at the same time I was writing superheroes. Not how I would have chosen to do it, but it's how it shook out. So,
your book touched on something that's very near to my heart. You just kind of glanced at it a couple of times, but the Grant Trey Lawrence animation TV show called The Marvel Superheroes from 1966. I personally love that show. And I loved it for the reason it was bad. Okay. Yeah. I loved it because there was the artwork of Jack Kirby on my TV screen. And I knew that even as a kid. There's Don Heck. There's, the other artists and it was the original Stan Lee stories, animated and kind of, truncated for, and yes, the animation was horrific. I mean, they would literally take a still drawing of the Hulk and move it.
Right. It was almost like South Park level of animation.
Yeah, it was like color forms. Yeah, it was. Right. But you know what? For me, it worked because for a couple of reasons. I think they used a lot of imagination in terms of the theme songs were awesome. Of all 5 heroes, when it was Hulk,
yes,
Hulk, Captain America, Thor, Submariner,
and Iron Man.
Right. And Iron Man was the best theme of the bunch.
Tony Stark makes you feel coolest cat,
swinging, baby.
Hottest weed.
Yeah. So anyway, I loved that show. Did you ever see it?
Hell yes. That show, even though it was before my time in first run, because it's from the 60s,
right?
That show was my first, I would have to say, my first exposure to superheroes. Way before I ever picked up a comic book. And I have to say that I think that's true of a lot of kids. Cartoons, TV cartoons were in general my first exposure to superheroes. Like before I ever picked up a comic book, I was watching not just that Marvel show, but the Super Friends, Obsessed, Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends, the old you remember the old Superboy cartoon?
Yes.
Crypto the Super Dog.
Super Dog, yeah.
Yes.
Those were
So-
the Hanna-Barbera joint productions, I think.
I think it was. It
Mhm.
might have been, or it might have been Filmation. I'm not sure.
Yeah,
But
you know what? Filmation sounds right. You're absolutely
also
right.
the Fantastic Four one from the
Yes.
60s.
Mhm.
That was
That
my
was-
introduction.
That was Hanna-Barbera. That was crossed with Hanna-Barbera
Yes.
somehow.
Yes.
And that was one of the
so-
few things that Hanna-Barbera did, the original show, that wasn't sweetened up. Like they did another Fantastic Four cartoon later that took away
the Human Torch.
the Human Torch because they thought it was too violent.
Well, I remember there was an urban legend. Don't know if it's true or not, but it was one of those legends that a kid had lit himself on fire to try to be like the Human Torch.
Oh gosh.
And I mean, you'd have to imagine that if that was true, obviously this would have had to have been a child who was disturbed or maybe had some type of autism or something to do something like that. And I don't know if it really happened or not, but that was the story. So they got rid of the Human Torch and they put in Herbie the Robot. Even as a kid, I was like, this sucks. I mean, I was like 8, but the not the Avengers, the Marvel superheroes show from the 60s. Yes. I was watching that. I want to say when I was like 4, 5, 6 years old, absolutely watching it. And I knew all the songs and watching, I didn't realize how crude it was. I went back to it years later. I found like bootleg DVDs of it.
I own them.
And I got them at the Chiller Theater Convention in New
That's
Jersey.
about right.
And I threw them on and I was like, wow, when you're that little, you just don't care. You don't notice. It's just cool as hell that, it's the Submariner. That's it. That's all you need to know. But that show was my introduction to superheroes.
I honestly think that they should have actually called the name of that show Marvel Comics for Television. People would have forgiven the stilted animation a little bit more. Other people would look at it and go, what am I looking at? These characters aren't even moving. And they would use the same frame shots over and over in each episode.
Oh, of course, there was the Spider-Man cartoon. How could I forget that?
Well, that the first season of that was Grant Ray Lawrence too.
Yes.
But they went bankrupt after that first season, even though the show was a success. And it got handed over to Krantz Films and Ralph Bakshi. And it was horrible.
They did some strange things later on that show.
Well, they changed it from the Spider-Man with his villains to him fighting aliens and weird creatures, and Yes. And I thought the animation on that was terrible. I thought, I think Bakshi is way overrated, but that's just me. But I thought it was not. The second and third seasons weren't great, but everybody remembers the theme song. I'll tell you that much.
Oh, I mean, that's the classic. To this day, it's used in all the movies they make, no matter what, across multiple studios. The song survives, yeah.
Well, that's the one thing about the Grant Ray Lawrence shows. The songs were great. The theme song, even our local affiliate that showed it did not show the opening credits for some reason.
That's half the enjoyment of the show.
Marvel superheroes have arrived. They never showed that. I didn't see that until I got the videos.
I saw it in a cut-up version too, now that you mention it. In fact, I think that the version I saw, because this would have been like very late 70s, maybe beginning of the 80s, the version I saw, if I am not mistaken, I believe that it had the Hulk removed from it. I'm not sure why, if there was some type of a legal issue. Maybe it's because there was the Hulk TV series that was on. But I remember it just being Thor, Submariner, Captain America, and Iron Man. I could be completely wrong, but for some reason, it was kind of chopped up.
Hulk's girlfriend, what was her name?
Betty Ross.
Betty Ross is shot in one of those Hulk episodes.
I don't remember that. I don't think I saw the Hulk ones.
Yeah, and I think that may have been too much for some affiliates.
There was a Saturday morning Hulk cartoon in the early 80s that ran with Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends, which was really cool, and I enjoyed it quite a bit.
Well, I will say this too, a little bit of trivia for you fans listening out there. The voice of Iron Man was John Vernon, who was Dean Wormer in Animal House.
Is he Iron Man? I know he's the voice of like J. Jonah Jameson.
No, he's He's Iron Man, yeah.
Wow. I know he did a bunch of those. Yeah, because there was an 80s version of the Spider-Man cartoon too, and I think he was Jameson on that.
The next time you see Animal House, you go, "Oh yeah, that's right. That was Iron Man."
He
You'll
did a
hear it.
lot.
I heard it. I heard it when I didn't know who John Vernon was, obviously, and I went and saw Animal House. I went, "That's Iron Man." So I
That's
looked it up, and
hilarious.
yeah, it was Iron Man.
I
So
always thought it was interesting how on the Spider-Man cartoon, his voice was different when he became Spider-Man.
yes, it was.
He changed his voice. It was almost like what they do with Batman.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember like thinking, they made him sound and seem very adult. This was a very adult Spider-Man. He was not really, they didn't really emphasize the teenage aspect of the Spider-Man character. He was very kind of caustic and mature in the kind of jokes he would make and the way he would talk. It's very different from today.
True. That now they really do focus on the youthful teenager who became the anti-hero or whatever you want to put it,
Yeah, because when I first started reading Spider-Man, again, in the 80s in the comics, he was not a kid anymore. I mean, he was married to Mary Jane. When I first started reading it, I think he was in college or just finishing up Empire State University, but he was an adult. So, and all that teenage stuff was in the past when I jumped on board.
Yeah, I was around to see or read. How did I read it back then? I know I read the Origin of Spider-Man or the early ones, and I don't know how. I mean, maybe I had the comics. I might have had those comics.
That was what those old comics were so good at, is they would obsessively retell the origins of all the characters. Because Stan Lee had that famous mantra, which I think they would do well to listen to today, which is that every comic book is somebody's first comic. I cannot tell you how many times, because my favorite comic, the one that I read longer than any other, was actually Incredible Hulk. I can't tell you how many times I read and reread the origin story of the Gamma Bomb and what happened to Bruce Banner. I feel like it was in almost every issue. There would be the drawing of the mushroom cloud. In front of the mushroom cloud would be a silhouette of Banner in his lab coat with his limbs outstretched, his glasses askew on his face. It was like the iconic pose of the origin of the Hulk. And it was I feel like on almost every issue, but you better be damn sure that I knew how Bruce Banner became the Hulk.
Right. Oh, did you have favorites as a kid? My favorite was a frustration for me for Marvel because my favorite characters were the X-Men. It was my favorite book.
Well, they were hot. They were.
Well, let me explain. This is the truth. It was around, 70 or 71, maybe 69 even.
Oh, they weren't really hot then.
The book was failing.
Yeah, they almost canceled it.
They did cancel it. They did. It wasn't almost. They did.
They were doing reprints.
I was a subscriber, and they sent me a letter saying, "We're canceling the X-Men, but you have 6 issues left on your subscription. You may replace it with any of these books. Please check, and we'll send you this comic instead." So they literally did cancel it. And this is after Neil Adams and Roy Thomas were doing it.
Yeah. I took an interest. Go on.
Oh, I was heartbroken. So the fact that cut 25, 30 years into the future and they were the hottest movie.
Yeah.
Going for at least the first 3 of them. And it was, I said, I can't believe it. They were canceled when they were my favorite characters.
See, I took an interest in the characters that were not the cool characters to like for whatever reason. I started reading comics heavily, like collecting on a weekly basis in 1985. And initially, my favorite, I was strictly Marvel for the first few years. And then I started reading Batman and Superman only, no other DC. I didn't get into other DC comics until I was an adult, probably. But Marvel, I was all about Marvel. But Iron Man, ironically, Iron Man was my first favorite when I first started reading comics. I loved Iron Man. And then they brought back the Silver Surfer. They did the new book where he finally escapes from Earth, which was which Ron Lim had the huge run on, and Jim Starlin, and it's where they brought Thanos back, and the whole Infinity Gauntlet storyline came out of that. I was obsessed with that in the late 80s. The Silver Surfer was my favorite, another favorite. Like I said, the Hulk, Mighty Thor, I loved. I loved Thor, and especially because I would notice that the books that people were talking about, like people loved to read X-Men. New Mutants was really hip. The Punisher was really in for a while. You know, anything related to Wolverine. Spider-Man was always cool, and I did like Spider-Man.
Mhm.
But the books that, I don't know, I found, maybe I was a dummy. I don't know. Or maybe I just expected something different from comics. The X-Men, all the mutant stuff was too cerebral for me. Like it was too talky. I appreciate it now. I think Chris Claremont is a genius because he was writing for adults. It's amazing. The John Byrne stuff, you know, it's fantastic. But when I was 11, 12, it was, I like the cosmic beings. I like the gigantic powers traveling, you know, to other dimensions, and the Hulk, you know, merging his different personalities. Like that kind of high drama is what I liked. I was into those kind of books. And I would notice a lot of times the books I liked, they didn't always get the best creative teams. Like I loved Thor, and this was after Walt Simonson had stopped. And he was amazing on Thor. But I jumped on right after that. And there was an artist doing it called Ron Friends. Not a bad artist, but he had a very throwback Silver Age style. It was very basic, straightforward style. This was in the era of like McFarlane and, you know, John Byrne and the crazy, you know, over the top way that the characters were being drawn. And it was very simple, and I loved it. I loved it. Those were really my favorites. Hulk, Thor, Iron Man, Silver Surfer. Those are my tops.
You had to bring up the Silver Surfer.
Yes.
I had purchased the original #1 comic of the Jack Kirby edition of the Silver Surfer, probably around 69 or 70. Right? They finally gave him his own book.
Right.
Because he had been a supplementary character for a while and a villain at one point. Then they sent me, then I said, this is great. I love this. I'm going to subscribe. And I did. And the first one they sent me was another copy of #1. I had 2 copies. I'm going to cry now. You know? Do you know what these things are worth? It's just
I have
insane.
a really beat up copy of that issue. It's so beat up that it's worthless. It's like somebody used it as a doormat, but I have it. Now, I always thought it was baffling, beyond baffling, that you would have this character, this cosmic traveler with all these powers, and say, you know what? He's going to be trapped on Earth for like 20 years. Why in the world they chose to do that, I don't know. But when they finally decided to set him free, oh man, I was all about it, because that book, that Silver Surfer book, Jim Starlin and Ron Lim, and there were other artists too, but it was Jim Starlin. It became like a space opera. Like it was insane. You had all the different heralds of Galactus showing up. You had Mantis. You had all like these characters people know from Guardians of the Galaxy now, like Drax the Destroyer showed up. You know, it was all the Kree and the Skrull and gigantic. You know, it was like Star Wars. I loved it.
I always thought, at least through those, you know, my era, that the Silver Surfer was the most tormented character.
Yes.
Other than Martian Manhunter and DC.
What a great origin. I'm hoping that he gets like a decent movie worth the character. I mean, he popped up in that god-awful Fantastic Four movie where, you know, Galactus is just like a cloud of dust or something. I don't even know what the hell he is. Mm-hmm. And the Surfer, the Surfer's in it, and they don't even tell you his origin. It's like one of the greatest origins ever. It's not even mentioned or discussed. They never tell you what his real name is. It's really bizarre. I would love to see one day them really do it right. In fact, what it would really lend itself to animation, like these Spider-Verse movies they're doing. If they did a Silver Surfer movie animated, oh my God, that would blow me away.
Wow. So your book came out, I believe, in May, right?
Yes, it came out in May.
I remember picking up, I pre-ordered my copy at Barnes & Noble, I'll have you know.
Thank you.
And went and picked it up because I still believe in buying books. You know, I like to buy books. And
crazy, isn't it? Novel idea.
It's a novel idea these days, yeah. But I will say that, how's it doing? Is the response to have been equal to your work that you put into it?
They were really smart to time it right before Father's Day, because I think that helped. It's been doing okay. My only concern with it, and I knew it was going to be, you know, part and parcel, is because I'm known mostly for wrestling, and I went from, this giant Sheik project to all of a sudden pushing now Gorilla Monsoon, my next wrestling project, I had a concern of having the superhero book slip through the cracks.
Right.
And because I definitely haven't talked about it as much as the other books, because it's not so much the audience that follows me, except for the overlap, like we've discussed.
Yeah.
So that's why, I'm glad to do shows like this. I've done a couple of other ones. It's nothing compared to the wrestling podcast. I mean, I've been on 40 million podcasts talking about the Sheik in the past year. No question. I'd love to do more superhero shows, but I mean, all things, considered, it's doing pretty well.
That's great. That's great. Well, I wanted to spread the word about it a little bit because, I think you're known in the wrestling business and you have your coterie of fans, I'm sure. And I think they may not know about this particular book because they follow you in other formats. Like if they listen to the wrestling news or their PWI, I don't know if you've talked about your book there.
I've talked about it on my podcast, my wrestling podcast.
On the wrestling one, your own, right?
I have discussed it and I've pushed it on there, yeah.
Mm-hmm. But we'll give it a little shove because you know what? As a full-grown adult who hasn't picked up a comic book in probably 25 years and missed the days when I did read them, in the same way I miss the old school wrestling and all that, it brought back so many memories. Just plain good old, like I say, the Grant Ray Lawrence Marvel Superhero series pops into your head, made me go to my DVD collection, grab one, and I watched. You remember they were always in 3 parts so they could put the ads in?
Yes, there would be like a 10-minute from this hero, then 10 minutes with this hero.
Is that how they did it on your affiliate? Because they used to show just the 3 parts on my in Albany when they showed it.
But I mean, each part would be if I remember right, it was like a little 10-minute adventure.
Yes. Yeah, right.
Yeah, and then they go to commercial, they come back, it would be a different character.
Oh, really? Is that how they showed them?
Yeah.
They used to show
Captain America throws his mighty shield.
Well, but they were 3-parters, and my affiliate would show part 1, 2, and 3 in succession.
You know what? I was 5 years old, so I could be misremembering. But
No, you're probably right about that. I could see why they would mix them up because that way you would tune in tomorrow to see the cliffhanger in chapter 1 into chapter 2. It makes sense.
Yeah.
And our show had a live host. Commander Ralph, Channel 10 in WTEN, Channel 10 in Albany. They gave the show a live host named Commander Ralph. His real name was Ralph Vardigan. He was a weatherman. And
I don't think he heard that.
Then. And he used to introduce the hey matey, today we've got that Tony Stark, he's building a new ship. I don't know what he's doing with that type of a host. He had the hat and everything,
Yep.
So this is what I remember for being a wee little tadpole. So but I tell you, the book's great, and I want everybody here to go out and check it out. It's available. Is it available in all the formats and they can get it anywhere they like?
There's no audio book, but there is a digital and print that you can get. You can buy it on Amazon in digital and print as well. So
essentially it's available everywhere, and that's good to know.
Yeah, yes it is.
All right, let's segue since we're here on the wrestling show. How's it going with Gorilla?
It's going pretty well. I'm sort of in transcribing hell right now, which is my least favorite part of the process, which is taking all these interviews. I have 40 interviews at this point that I've done. And, I'm using an AI software to try to save myself time. But the problem is that the AI software doesn't know about wrestling. And all the names get mangled. A lot of the terminology gets mangled. And it winds up taking just as long because I have to go in there to the transcriptions, play the audio, and fix all the mistakes just so it makes sense to myself when I go through it. Mm-hmm. Now, I still am preferring to do it that way. I didn't do it that way with Sheik. I'm preferring it because it's actually less mental aggravation, even though it takes the same amount of time. Having to type out every single word. I thought of every way to do it. It's not cost effective to hire somebody to do it. It's just not. If I was Stephen King, if I was, Tom Clancy, okay, but I'm not. So it's not worth it unless they want to do it for free. And, my wife has offered to do it. And I love my wife, so I'm not going to do that to her because it's torture. My daughter offered to do it with Sheik, and she gave up after in the middle of the first one. She was like, I can't do it. Sorry.
No, it is time consuming.
That I hate. So I'm looking forward to getting that behind me because now I'm pretty much done with the interviews. I do here and there. If a big one comes along, I do it. Like I just interviewed Bret Hart because his brother Ross Hart put me in touch with him. So I'm not going to be like, well, I'm not doing any more interviews, Bret. Sorry, So of course I'm going to do that. But right now I'm looking forward to getting this phase behind me because I'm already now in my head with everything I've been reading. And that's my process. Like I just feed it all into my head. I don't take a lot of handwritten notes in the beginning. It's just process of repetition, reading articles, watching shoot interviews, listening to the interviews I've done, transcribing them over again. In my head, it just starts to congeal into like a story arc, things I want to stress, themes that I want to kind of hammer on through the story. And so I'm anxious to get on with it, but I can't do it until I have everything like set up in front of me to be able to refer to it as I write. So getting there.
Given how popular Gorilla Monsoon was as a personality, and as somebody a lot of people knew, have you found that reaching out to people for comments on him has been easy, or has it been a little harder than you thought it might have been? Because I get a feeling people would love to talk about him.
Yes, you're right. I can't lie. It's, no one has a single bad word to say about him. And, that wasn't the case with the Sheik, certainly. It's certainly the case with Gorilla. And that's rare in the wrestling business. Everyone loved him, respected him. Everyone has kind things to say about him. It's kind of a relief. There's not a lot of, it's not a very dark story. The Sheik story was very dark.
Mm-hmm.
At the end, it gets dark because he loses his son. He sort of gives up on life. And he dies a pretty sad death. He lets his body go to diabetes and, he dies fairly young. But that's like the last 5 years. The rest of his life is just like a dream come true. I mean, he had the ultimate kind of career that any wrestler would kill for to have in this industry. He had it. And people can criticize him and say, well, he homesteaded. He hunkered down. He was like 5-6 years in the business and he basically stopped traveling, which is fairly true. But, anyone, if given the opportunity to do that at the level he did and buy into the office and do all that kind of stuff, would do it. I mean, would take it. He wasn't, that's the thing, he wasn't a carny. That's the thing. A lot of times wrestling was populated by guys that got into it because it meant you never had to grow up and you could just be this kind of like eccentric sophomoric man-child for the rest of your life. Like people like Dr. Jerry Graham, classic example. Those guys wouldn't want that. They like being on the road, getting away from the goddamn wife and kids, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Raising a ruckus, doing whatever you want. He wasn't one of those guys. He was a homebody. He was faithful. He was an educated man. He was a businessman. He had a famous line that he told Bobby Heenan. He said, if you're in this business for anything other than money, you are a fool. He was a very smart man, but he loved the business. So, I mean, he was able to succeed at a level that most guys wouldn't have even entertained the possibility of doing because they didn't have the capacity to do it.
Well, you know what I'm looking forward to in your book? Again, don't tell me anything, but I'm going to tell you what I'm looking forward to in your biography. How he went from a snarling, huge Manchurian beast into the erudite announcer, commissioner character after a while. You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
Rarely can you not leave a place. If you leave for 5 years and come back, people would tend to forget your original guys. That didn't happen with him. He kind of stayed around and just kind of morphed.
Yeah, he did.
So I got to figure out how they did that.
Well, as a kid, I remember because I had family members that had been wrestling fans back in the day. Like my dad remembered when he was the monster heel. And so I knew about that. I knew about that era. And growing up in New York City, it's just like in the air. Wrestling fans, Bruno Sammartino, you just know. And I remember thinking, wow, that's really weird how, no one even talks about that part of his life and career now. It's like it never happened. And I remember as a kid thinking like, and it's so funny because it was prophetic. In my head, I'm going like, I wonder if in 20 years from now, this is like in 1991, like, I wonder if in 20 years from now, that'll be like The Undertaker. Like he'll just be sitting there in a suit and tie with a microphone, like just being The Undertaker and just like talking like a normal person. And lo and behold, that has now occurred.
Right.
It took a little longer than I thought, but I gave a lot of attention. I have been to that whole, like, how did he turn babyface exactly? How did he stop? When did he start talking? Like, these are things that I've given so much attention to try to figure out because it's very much shrouded in mystery back then. They did things differently, especially when it comes to faces and heel turns.
Yeah.
Like in the case of Gorilla, what I'm finding is his face turn was very gradual. It was something that happened like at a series of different shows, almost like in different markets, in different towns. They would repeat certain incidents. And so there's no one moment that you can point to. It's not like, the specific, this is when he turned babyface. It doesn't seem to be what happened. Although I did talk to a longtime fan who was able to pinpoint to me his memory of the first promo where he actually heard him speak and how they explained it and how he had his manager, his manager was retiring or whatever. And he was like trying to brush up on the English language because he knew that he had to speak for himself now because he didn't have a manager anymore. So, I mean, there are things like that I'm discovering that will be in the book. It's fascinating.
And it's amazing how fans accept a change. I remember 1972, George Steele, he was still the Animal.
He had the reverse development.
But he gave lucid interviews.
Yes.
Listen, Daddy, I'm going to beat him up and he can't get near me. And the usual. And 2 years later, he had a green tongue and was howling. You people have short memories out there.
Yeah. Well, he did the reverse. He went from speaking to being an animal, and Gorilla went from an animal to speaking.
The East Coast. The hallmark of the old triple WF. It was like you could get away with it. Well, I always talk about Moondog Rex, who in the space of 5 weeks on television went from Ripper Hawkins to Moondog Hawkins to Moondog Rex in the same arena in front of the same people.
Yeah, they would do that. They would,
and they got away with it.
They were experimenting sometimes.
Yeah, but right in front of the same audience, that freaks me out. It always has, that people sit there and aren't questioning or anything. They just go, "Oh, okay."
Well, I remember as a kid being so curious. They eventually stopped doing this. It had to be a directive from Vince. But when I first started watching WWF, they would call him Gino.
Yes, or Jesse Ventura did.
Jesse would call him Gino.
Right.
And I think even Bobby Heenan would call him Gino. Johnny Valiant would call him Gino when he was on commentary with him. Mm-hmm. And I remember being like, who the hell's Gino? Where does that come from? And that got me curious, and then come to find out it's not even, because then I assumed, well, that must be his real name, I guess. It's not even his real name. It's another gimmick that he had before. And it just stuck. It sort of is like how to this day, there are people who will call Mick Foley Cactus to this day.
I'm guilty of that.
As if it's his name.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Howard Stern even would call him that because that's how we first got to know him on the show, no matter how many times he changed his gimmick. Or another great one, which always makes me laugh, was William Regal. He is close to the Gorilla Monsoon example because I remember backstage, everyone would still call him Steven, especially the people that he knew in WCW.
Mm-hmm.
But then you stop and you go, his name's not even Steven. His name is Darren. His name is Darren Matthews. They're calling him Steven as if they're trying to say, well, we know what your real name is, William. Your name is Steven. But it's not. It's just a previous gimmick name that he had.
Mm-hmm.
Only in wrestling,
He was one of the few, Mr. Regal, one of the few things I liked during that period of WCW. He was there, with Bill Dundee for a few minutes, I think.
Sir William, yes.
Yeah, but he would just sneer and make fun of those disgusting American hot dogs. That kind of shtick. Billy Robinson used to do it. Other people used to do it. It always works. Don't put down the good old USA. And he would come out sneering at the fans, like Cicluna did in 1965. He just would sneer at people.
He was so great.
Always worked.
He played into the stereotypes because wrestling is so hilarious because, and especially if you know the accents and things, like William Regal was a street kid. He was the furthest thing from this upper crust Englishman. He comes from a northern town which is sort of like the equivalent of a southern town in the United States. He was like a working class kind of a guy, rough and tumble. And just because he was from England, they turned him into like he was Lord Cadbury.
An aristocrat.
Right. It would be, I can't even think of the American equivalent. It would be like taking a guy from Brooklyn and bringing him, to Europe in a wrestling federation. And all of a sudden he's talking like a movie star from the 1940s or something, like Clark Gable or something. It's just this reduction of, oh, you're from England? Okay, so we're going to make you an aristocrat. Even though you don't sound like an aristocrat at all, we're going to make you an aristocrat. It's hilarious.
Stereotypes.
Yes.
And apparently they sell. They do sell, or they did for the longest time in wrestling. If there's ever a sport that uses stereotypes, it's wrestling. I mean, go down the list. I mean, anybody that wasn't from here, boo. I hate to say it.
Very easy to do.
Japanese, boo. Germans, boo. It's just, they pigeonhole you.
Look at Lord Alfred Hayes. I mean, he's another one that made a career from that, but at least he had the right accent. Lord Alfred Hayes really fit the part. I mean, I believed that man just walked out of a manor, like on an estate somewhere, that he was an English gentleman. I bought it hook, line, and sinker. I have to say.
He was so funny as a manager in various. I have some videotapes of him taking a sip of tea. This tea was prepared in a barbaric manner. Take it away.
He was great as a heel. Yeah.
Oh yeah, he was.
I wish they'd used him that. Excuse me. I wish they'd used him that way in the WWF, and I think it was because he had some type of a back or neck surgery, and at that point he wasn't really mobile anymore, so he couldn't really be a manager. So they made him an announcer. But
was that right?
He would. Well, that's why. If you notice, he lost a few inches in height. His whole physical appearance changed.
He did.
He got very kind of squat. His neck got very. You could tell that he had something done to his neck. He couldn't really move his neck anymore. He had like that fusion thing done. But he would have been a fantastic heel manager in the WWF. So good. So good. There would even be times where he would subtly kind of heel it up on commentary, but they never really committed to it.
He was so good verbally that people tend to forget what a doggone good wrestler he was.
Yes. They
never talk about his wrestling, but they talk about, he's Tuesday Night Titans and, the Fry Daddy Cooker at the end of the syndicated programs. Remember he used to do the voiceovers for the ads?
Oh, of course. Stetson Cologne.
Beautiful.
Before you stalk.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, my favorite. Mr. Freeze, freezer bars. They're as fun to freeze as they are to eat.
That's right. The Fry Daddy, Fry Mommy, Fry Baby Cookers.
Yeah.
The little French fry maker,
I remember one time on TNT, and this was very rare for them to do, because, he was like the Ed McMahon on TNT. There was a wrestler that they had brought into the WWF. It might have been Bobby Heenan, actually, who made his first appearance on TNT as a guest. And this person, maybe it was Piper. No, I think it was Heenan. They had a history with Lord Alfred Hayes in another territory. Might have been Georgia, Florida, or something. They'd had a very well-known kind of like brutal match between the two of them. And they actually acknowledged it in this roundabout way when he came out on TNT. It was something like where they looked at each other and it was like, well, I still don't trust you. And, we're going to have to coexist with each other. And they never explained why they said that. And it wasn't until years later that I discovered the reason behind it, that there had been this feud in another territory between them. And they felt like they had to somehow, that's back when they still cared about stuff like that.
Continuity.
They had to somehow explain to fans why these guys are now friends.
But still, that's continuity. That's great.
Continuity.
How many times have you watched WWE and they don't even have continuity from week to week?
I know.
I hate to say that, but it's
Right.
As we tape this episode, it's going to be SummerSlam weekend this weekend. And I watched last Monday, not this past Monday, but the previous Monday, to me, the worst build to a pay-per-view I have ever seen on Monday Night Raw. It was an entire 2 hours of sneak attacks and hitting from behind.
Lazy.
That was it. That every single angle was people being beat up from behind.
Yeah, it's very
from
repetitive.
Rhea Ripley and Liv Morgan to everything else on the show. You know, the final scene. And what bothers me about current WWE is there's never any repercussions. It's just allowed. It's, you know, we let them run around. And there's one scene where the Judgment Day is beating up on people in the ring, and you see referees behind the ring running in different directions, but not doing anything. Like, they're not breaking it up. They're not trying to end the carnage. You just see people running about the ring as if just showing up is going to make them stop. Well,
I think it's only us old guys that care about that sort of thing.
I think you're right.
The Attitude Era torpedoed all that stuff, and they turned it into, this is just a television show, and this is part of the show. Because I still sit there and go like, why in the world would they just allow the wrestlers to just come in the ring and just talk directly to the audience for as long as they feel like it? Like, you're essentially stopping the show. Like, this is a wrestling show. It's one thing to have a promo backstage, you know, guy with a microphone interviewing the wrestler, or after the match at ringside or in the ring. Hey, what do you think about blah, blah, blah? But to just have the wrestler just comes out, stands in the middle of the ring, gets on the mic, and just gives a soliloquy.
Mm-hmm.
And it was cool when they first did it because it was different and interesting. But now it's just part of the show. Wrestlers just address. They can just stop the show. You know, like, I picture Bill Watts coming out and being like, get the hell out of my ring. Give me that mic. We have a match. We have a match coming up. You don't have permission to be out here speaking to these people. You know, they even have it now where the wrestlers, like, let's say you start with a promo segment. The wrestlers coming out to the ring to do this promo segment to start the show, the wrestlers will welcome the crowd to Monday Night Raw.
Right.
I mean, and I guess maybe this doesn't strike young fans as strange, but to an old school fan, it's the most bizarre thing in the world. Could you imagine, you know, just like, I don't know, Ken Patera coming out at the beginning of Championship Wrestling, grabbing the mic and going, hey, welcome everybody to WWF Championship Wrestling. Now I want to talk to you about what I'm going to do to Bobby Backlund. You know, it's like, it would be unheard of. You know what I mean? Like, he's one of the talent. He's not the host of the show.
The very act of someone with a microphone holding it up next to a wrestler to get a promo, it was an interview, not a promo.
Right.
First of all. Secondly, it's like every other sport. If you wanted to talk to you had to come. Somebody in charge or somebody involved with the sport would interview them, and then you'd get the inflammatory quotes and everything like that. But now, like you say, and the other thing that has bothered me for well over 25 years now is the scene in the locker room. Somebody's putting their boots on or something. Someone comes out to talk match strategy in front of cameras.
Right. And they'll go, hey, this is a secret. Don't tell anybody this, you know?
Yeah.
You're on television. You know, why is the camera there? I will say this. One thing that I actually love about AEW, and this had to come from somebody. I don't know if it was a Cody Rhodes thing initially, if it's a Tony Khan idea or what. I really tend to believe this is not something coming from the elite guys. But if you notice, any backstage segment in AEW, I don't know if you watch their show, whenever it's one of those things where there's the camera like capturing something, they always try to explain why the camera's there. They actually work very hard to explain it. Like, they'll have a thing where the wrestlers are specifically saying that they're filming their own promo that they're going to send to, you know, the wrestler they hate. And they'll address the cameraman like, hey, Jimmy, make sure you get this. Like, you know, don't cut yet. Like, they'll address that the camera's there. They'll address, like, why is the camera following this person? Whereas in the WWF, it's just fourth wall broken. They're just performing as if they're on a sitcom, you know?
My old friend, suspension of disbelief, Howie hardly knew ye. You know, it's like, I don't know what to say sometimes. It's not that I don't watch. It's not that I don't try to watch and enjoy. Some things I do enjoy. I still love the WWE women's division because at least the women's division, they fight for the reasons the men's used to fight for. I want that belt and I'm better than you.
Right.
That's basically the women's division. If you agree with that, I don't know. But their angles are so much simpler than what the men do.
I'm very glad that they have been getting in recent years, they have finally abandoned the evil authority figure concept, because man, talk about beating a dead horse until
Absolutely.
there
Yeah.
was nothing left of the horse, not even bones. Like, it's not, before Vince, it was actually Eric Bischoff. I mean, that was the beginning of it. Eric Bischoff in WCW, mind blowing.
Right.
Then they did it with Vince and WWF, mind blowing to the 10th degree. But it just then became endless.
Well, Triple H and Stephanie
format of the show. You had to have an evil commissioner.
Yeah, John Laurinaitis, down the list it went. I mean,
And every angle and storyline, all of a sudden, instead of personal issues, like we always talk about, personal issues, sell tickets, right? Blah, blah, blah. Instead of personal issues, everything became this weird meta angle, like I'm fighting for control of the company, or I'm fighting to preserve my legacy or something. Like, it's nothing that you can sink your teeth into. Like,
Right.
I hate you because, you have something I want. You have a title I wanted. Or you hurt my friend. Or you said something bad about my wife.
Mm-hmm.
Or whatever. Things that you can sink your teeth into, not these weird esoteric, like it worked for Austin, so now we have to do it till the end of time. I'm glad they have actually moved away from that.
I think we're about to see, this episode is going to come on after the pay-per-view, but we're about to see the blow-off to the Cody Rhodes Brock Lesnar feud. And to this moment, no one has explained what made Brock Lesnar mad. Not for a second. Not for a second.
I think Cody has tried to do this. There have been a couple of throwaway lines, and I do believe he has a lot of creative control over his promos. So I tend to think this is coming from him. There were a couple of throwaway lines where he would say something like, I think that you were jealous of me because I took your spot. Nobody's talking about you anymore. Now they're talking about me, like I'm the next in line, and you're, yesterday's news, like Roman Reigns beat you, you're out of the title picture, and now you see me as, instead of you getting back into it, now I'm in the way. But it was very weak. It was never really hammered home by the announcers, and it certainly hasn't been something that they've reminded you of on a weekly basis.
Right. No. So I've been confused. If I missed that promo, I still don't know. I must have missed it.
Yeah.
Because I didn't know why he had heat. But
it's been a little confusing. It's true. It was it seemed like just a shock value thing,
Yeah. Well, it would be shocking if they didn't do it every 2 days with somebody else. It's like, again, the outside interference and the hits from behind, wrestler appears in the ring, hits somebody from behind. And it's not even, I miss the days when the announcers would be outraged at such a thing.
Yes, thank you very much.
That's a big point of this. Even the announcers now are like, well, this is what you do.
Right, that's what you got to do to get ahead. And I'm like, but that's what the heel announcers say.
Right.
That's not what a babyface announcer is supposed to be outraged at this.
In the words of Jack Reynolds in 1970, that's uncalled for.
I see it or Lance Russell was the best at that. Lance Russell was like the frustrated dad.
Oh, he's
all the
great.
Wrestlers were the kids. But Roman Reigns is the biggest example of that. Roman Reigns is booked on TV as a cowardly heel that can't win without all of his backup, right?
Mm-hmm.
He's your classic heel champion. I mean, he's a cool heel. He's like a Ric Flair or Superstar Graham, but he's a coward. He's a manipulator. He can't win matches on his own. The announcers praise him.
Yes, as
like
if he's Bruno.
Hogan.
Bruno, yeah.
Like he's Bruno.
Yeah.
They tout his records. They never talk about, like, he never beat any of these guys. He's a cheater. Like, it's just totally not the booking. The way it's booked is not the way it's described by the announcers. Very, very strange.
It is strange. What would be the only recent angle where there was outrage? Oh, what was it? Oh, it was Rey Mysterio Dominic, and it was
oh God, yeah, Michael Cole
went off.
But see, that's great. That was great.
That's what you're supposed to do.
That's what you should be doing. I mean, can you imagine JR with Roman Reigns? I mean, I know, like, announcers, they always have the producers in their ear telling them things and producing them. But you have to think, if it was the classic days of JR and the King on commentary, JR would be losing his mind with all the bloodline interference and cheating and all the stuff that Roman Reigns gets away with. It would be like, that son of a bitch, Reigns, like, give me a break. Who does this guy think he is? That man has a family, God damn it. Like all that kind of stuff. That's what's missing.
Well, everybody loves the bloodline angles, and everybody involved is doing a fantastic job from Paul Heyman to both of the Usos. However, I still can't stand it. There's nothing going on. It's 22 minutes at the beginning of a show with no action.
They're leaning very heavily into
it. They are, especially on SmackDown. They're leaning on that wholeheartedly.
They're seeing
the LA Knight pop, I guess.
Well, they're seeing that people love it, and they're going, well, let's do more of it. I remember like when they had SmackDown at the Garden a few weeks ago, they had 3 matches on a 2-hour show, and they had two 20-minute bloodline segments on the show.
Right.
But they do it because they feel like that's what people want to see. I don't know if it's true or not, but if I was there live, and I know they gave the live audience a dark match, world title match after the show ended, they did that, but I would still feel ripped off. If I paid that kind of money and went to Madison Square Garden to see the WWF, and I got 3 TV matches, and the rest of the show was talking, I'd be pissed.
Me too. And I'll tell you what, I'm really afraid that they're going to Ed Farhat Roman Reigns.
Yeah.
Meaning the same thing over and over and over and over and over. It's already happened with his matches even before the split up of the bloodline. Somebody would interfere for him and he'd win. Now it's 5-6 weeks builds to things with 20-minute segments at the end of every show. The trial of Roman Reigns, what? Can we have a match?
Right.
A sanctioned match with a legitimate winner once in a great while, please. Is that too much to ask for? I guess it is.
It is nowadays. Yes.
Yeah. I'm outdated.
That's why we have the old stuff to watch.
Yeah.
I enjoy it so much. I watch modern wrestling, but I would rather watch a Mid-South Coliseum card over a WWE premium live event any day of the week.
I'm the same way. Way. Yet you still write for current wrestling in PWI.
Well, I cover it as news. It doesn't mean I have to love all of it. It's just I'm sure that people that write regular news definitely don't love all the things they're writing.
Oh no, I used to be a news reporter.
There you go.
My first job at my hometown newspaper, I covered a murder case.
Oh my!
And a big one, a big international murder case, and won an award for that too, right off the bat. It was just like I got thrown into the job, and bang, this guy came into our county and murdered somebody. So,
wow, lucky you.
But I hated it. You hate doing it because this is life and death, and in your mind, you're going, I want to cover the news, and I want to exploit it.
But
the newspaper wants to push it.
Right. That's how I knew I could never be a true journalist, because I studied journalism in college and I thought about going into it. I don't have that kind of killer instinct. I find it very hard. I'm not saying that you are a dick, but I find it very hard to be a dick and to have to be this person that, doesn't care about somebody's feelings and just wants to get the story. Like, that's very hard for me to do.
Yes. Yeah.
Very hard. I remember I would have these arguments because in magazines, I've worked with newspaper people, and when I was at WWE, even I had people there that had been at the Daily News and stuff. And I remember this one time having a conversation with one of them where they were talking about how Shane McMahon lived in the same neighborhood in New York City as James Gandolfini. He lived in Tribeca, and he would see Gandolfini on jogs now and then, like covered head to toe, so nobody would recognize him. And I remember this guy that used to work for the Daily News would be like, "Oh my God, Shane, this would be such an opportunity if I was still at the Daily News. We could trail him, take a picture, see what he's doing. I could send you to find out where he eats and all this stuff." And I was like, for the love of God, could we let the man have a private life? He's like the most famous person on the planet Earth. He's walking around head to toe in a jogging suit and a ski mask because he doesn't want people to recognize him. Leave him alone. And it was like, I could never be a newsman,
Well, I will never forget the New York Post had a cover when Norah Jones was a big star with her first album.
Yeah.
They had an arrow on the cover pointing at her apartment in Brooklyn.
Oh my God.
This is where Norah Jones lives. Are you kidding me?
That's
I mean,
bad news, man.
I mean, this is again. I wasn't a reporter for long. We'll put it that way. You know, I became a sports editor, which was more my milieu. But getting into that kind of thing, I could never. I'm like you. I could never do it. I won't write CEO or SEO either. But that's just my thing.
I've done that too, and that's what made me change my career path. I was like, how did this happen to me? Why am I doing this? How did this wasn't what I went to college for.
Yeah, I literally changed careers. I saw it going in that direction. I'm like, it's the heck with it.
Yeah. That's when I knew when they were, when print was dying out and everything was becoming internet, and basically I was being told the exact opposite of what I was trained, which was I was always trained quality over quantity. And the mantra of SEO and online writing is quantity over quality. I mean, it's exactly the reverse. And I just felt icky doing it. So I don't do it anymore.
Yes. I even read some wrestling news websites where it's definitely written in SEO and I cringe. I just cringe. I won't name them, but
see, that's why I love doing wrestling news the way we do it with Arcadian Vanguard, because we treat it like we're doing NPR, except it just happens to be about wrestling.
Exactly. I was going to say Walter Cronkite myself, but that's
I mean, like down to like if you listen to like the choices of music, like the intro, outro music. My wife is like, this doesn't really fit wrestling. It's like some kind of Miles Davis thing, and I'm like, no, that's not what we're going for. We're going for something really serious, respectable. We have that tagline: no clickbait, no paywall. It's all free. We're not trying to like grab you with some stupid headline. Kurt Angle had this to say about a WWE Hall of Famer that he doesn't want to work with. That's not news. This is not news. We're not taking that approach. And maybe it means that we have less of an audience than we would if we did that stuff. But we're trying to do it the right way. Nobody else is. Nobody.
It looks like you're doing okay to me. And I want to tell you something from one podcaster to another. I'm not on your level, but I will say this. I want to be original with this show. Totally. So I've been listening to your show because, when we met, I became a fan and I listened to your show, and I realized out of nowhere that you would end segments with a ring bell, ding, ding. And I was doing it too. I went, oh my God.
Oh no,
I can't do that. So I stopped. And
sorry.
Now it's okay. I have interstitial music, but this is how serious I am about doing my own thing. I don't want to emulate anybody else or steal anybody else's deal, So I want you to know I've stopped using ring bells in between the interviews.
I didn't use it.
It was such an obvious thing when I put in the podcast together. I said, well, how can I, put a little adjoiner in there to, to just give that 2 seconds between talking.
Right.
So I found a ring bell and was using it, and now I've stopped because of you.
Well, I had nothing originally. The first few episodes, it was just the intro would go right into the interview, and I started going like, there should be some kind of a transition or something. And I started doing the ring bell because it just was the easiest, most,
But, I found some cool, when you hear this, you'll hear some pretty cool music. I found some bumpers that are just fantastic. So I'm really happy with that.
Well, I'm sorry to make you.
No. I just want to express to you that I have such admiration for you that I would not want to copy your deal.
Thank you. Thank you.
I really mean it. And I really do respect you so much. You do incredible work. I'm going to say this to you. I'm probably going to say it later in the podcast, but I'm way older than you, but when I grow up, I want to be Brian R. Solomon. So thank you for being here. By the way, folks, he's a little under the weather. He's got a cold right now. And I think he pulled his way through this beautifully. Brian, can't thank you enough. Another great conversation.
It's my pleasure. Sorry about the croaky voice, but I'm like you said, I'm battling this thing. So it was a pleasure still always to talk about this stuff, no matter what.
We're going to have to do this in real time. I want to shake your hand and, share a pint with you sometime.
Would love to. Yeah.
Yep.
Would love
we're going to have to. We're not that far away from each other, so we should.
And if you are you still up in the Albany area?
No. I'm in Long Island. Oh, no, excuse me. I live in Queens.
Oh, okay. So you're in the city. So that's come on. I'm down there all the time. Not as often as I used to be, but because my family's from there, but there is nobody anymore in Brooklyn.
Well, this is why they invented instant messages, so we'll get a hold of each other and we'll bask in our good fortune and our friendship. And again, it is Brian R. Solomon, the great podcast, Shut Up and Wrestle on the Arcadian Vanguard Network, and all the great books about the Sheik and superheroes. Type his name in an Amazon and have a ball because these are fantastic. Thanks again, Brian.
My pleasure.
I know what you're thinking, Bob, books. But you know what? 2 really great books 2 weeks in a row here. You've got to check out Superheroes. You've definitely got to check out The Sheik's Blood and Fire by Brian Solomon. And last week's book, a treasure trove of great AWA photographs, entitled My Ringside Seat to the AWA by Joyce Postian, a wonderful lady. And I'll tell you what, get a hold of her, write to her at joyce.postian, which is Paustian @gmail.com. She'll get you all the information you need. Joyce.postian @gmail.com. Great book. Written with love. I don't know how else to put it, because that really is the case. It's written in such a way that you can tell the fondness she had for the long gone days of pro wrestling, the same way I do. You know, another person who I have met and felt like I knew her my whole life, like Mike Morsh and a lot of other people who've been on the show. You know, it's just, it's been so much fun meeting new people as well as touching base with my old friends. So, and speaking of friends, yes, we're going to do the trivia contest. I promise we're going to do the trivia contest. I'm hoping to have an announcement next week about the contestants and a date. But I'll have to try to set that up very quickly. Things have been moving slow with that. But you know what? The whole idea of that show is to give you some brain teasers and hope you get a lot of laughs out of it. You know, as the 3 contestants battle it out for a really meager prize. So in any event, I hope you tune in for that once we get that up going. If it's not next week, it'll be soon. So I guess it's time for the housekeeping like we always do it. Our fan club, where you can contribute to the show if you feel like it and learn more about it and get some perks. Like we're going to have a Zoom meeting scheduled soon where all of our friends are going to get together on some evening and talk wrestling. This will not be part of the regular podcast. It's going to be a private conversation with me and maybe some special guests. Who knows? Maybe I can convince some of my old PWI compadres to join in too, but we'll find out. So I'm going to announce that soon. Anyway, our website is outdatedwrestlinghour.buzzsprout.com. It has all of our shows. If you're app phobic, you can simply press the button and listen to them right there. outdatedwrestlinghour.buzzsprout.com. And again, all the information about our silly little fan club, it's all right there. Find our Gmail at outdatedwrestling@gmail.com. Questions, queries. You want to be in the show, write to me. You know, wrestlers, peripheral people. You know, try it. You know, if you've been listening and you have something to contribute to the show, give me an email. Let's see if we can work something out. Because I think the show has been very interesting the last 6 months since we started. It's been a blast. Twitter, I'm Bob Smith NYC. I'm still at Facebook as plain old Bob Smith. You can see me singing with BB King on the lead page in case you cross me up with the other 8,600 Bob Smiths that are on Facebook. You know, I'm not even going to mention Threads. I'm on Threads too, but nobody else is. So I'm not going to bother with it. So in any event, I hope you enjoyed this show. Brian R. Solomon is one of a kind. I am proud to call him a new friend and proud to call you my new friends as well. This is the Outdated Wrestling Hour, where we look back fondly at the old days of professional wrestling. Until next time, I'm going to say what I've been saying the last couple of months of the show. Will you take care of yourself?